Well, thank you, everybody. So I hope nobody got caught outside with the demonstration. Um, we have a beautiful lecture now by two very special people who are not amateurs, or people who've been exposed to stuff really that is interesting and dear to my heart too. Before I present them, I will just share a little memory of mine. I mean, that is quite painful. Was my interview to get into School of Medicine. So I was 18 years old, and suddenly everything was going great, fantastic. I think I'm gonna make it. I got good grades and so on. And then they asked me, "Why do you want to be a doctor? What kind of doctor do you want to be?" And I answered back, "I'd like to become a doctor in order to treat people," at that time we said, "in third world countries." And then they look at me with big eyes. "What for?" I said, "What do you mean?" And so I said, "Well, I'd like to go in Africa," or something like that. And it turned out that they refused me at the medical school because of that. But I got a phone call 1 week after, and I got a second interview, because maybe I could not explain myself well, but ultimately it was my dream, and it's a dream that never happened actually. So of course, when I was highly influenced by some heroes, like, I don't know, Dr. Schweitzer, or maybe Dr. Teasdale, and so on. It was like a little dream. But it turned out that my life was totally different, of course. I did not go there as a doctor, but I met a lot of people who were involved in that. They always kept a very fascination, a deep fascination for not only the exoticism about helping people in rather poorer countries, but the kind of dedication of people who are willing to give a little of their own lives for people they love. And that I understood that we could do this anywhere in the world. So anyway, so the story goes that we have two people here who are going to talk with us. Dr. Dominique Corti is, of course, the daughter of Professor Teasdale in Piero Corti. And she was born actually in Uganda. She was raised in Europe, but she would go back once in a while to see her parents. And she was involved after that into keeping alive the work that the parents had created and developed so well for so many years. And she will share with us this experience. And we have also Dr. Filippo Cianzi, who, along with his wife, spent almost 29 years in Uganda as a doctor, and then raised a large family, and then came back in Europe and was involved in many works, including pharmaceutical, vaccination. He's part of many, I'd say, international organisms that get involved into internal medicine, and he will share his experience with us. So I will ask first Filippo to give us his experience to share with us, and then we will listen to Dominique Corti. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope you can hear well, because usually I move, so if I keep it fixed, I will not be. So first of all, I want to greet Dominique, and I met her when she was 14 years old, so we had a great friendship. And today, first of all, thanking you for inviting and listening to us. I'm a bit humbled by the presentation that came so far. And anyway, the theme is creative care, because it's the theme of the conference, in low resource settings, because I thought we could give this contribution to the discussion. And I want to make a quick definition as I look at the point, because I don't use any longer the third world countries, because the world is becoming so complicated and complex that it's very difficult to make classification, but low resource settings. And I like very much the second part of the theme, making space for the unexpected, because particularly in low resource settings, you need to be able to face and to take care of people and patients, and the work you're doing with a lot of creativity. Anyway, besides the definitions, what characterized my experience for many years was to live where infrastructure was poor, where materials and supplies were not available. The human resources, I think we can use that term. I don't know about words. I don't know. We have today I went through my presentation to see whether there was any word that was not appropriate, but I don't know if human resources is acceptable. I asked professor there, and even relatively untrained and insufficient in number. And in this situation, my experience was that concerned and compassionate human beings can always do something of value, no matter how seemingly inadequate. And healthcare in low resource setting is ultimately a matter of people. And today we are going also to know the experience of Piero and Lucille Corti, the experience of Dominique, to see how they made the difference, and then they made also infrastructure to grow. The second part of this talk, final talk of the afternoon, will be about the experience of the hospital, St. Mary's Hospital, Laccio. And then people helping other people is the most vital element that I experience, and I want to go through. First of all, with a small introduction about my experience, how I found myself in a low resource setting, because my first night in my station, that was in northern Uganda, from Milan to Kigum in northern Uganda, it took 4 days. When we landed in Entebbe, that is the airport of Kampala, Uganda, it's like Logan, Boston, or I don't know how you call your airport here, Logan, where I start from. The theme of the first meeting, it took 1 day to find the petrol, to fill the tank of the Land Rover to move to, we were in 1980, however, it took 1 day to fill the tank and leave to the north. Then we arrived in Gulu, actually St. Mary's Hospital, Laccio, and the theme of the meeting was evacuation plan in dangerous situation, because we arrived there soon after the fall of Amin, the dictator, and there was a long period of isolation of doctors and Italian doctors in northern Uganda. No news at all, so there was a lot of complaints in the public society in Italy about these doctors abandoning the north. But the team, we just arrived, my wife and myself, first mission to the north, then evacuation. The plan was evacuation. Actually, at the end, all groups of doctors in the various hospitals, they were saying the best strategy is to remain put, to remain where you are before moving, because it's more dangerous to move than to remain in the place. When we arrived in Kingo, there was no electricity, and then for the first time, I learned to use the paraffin lamp. And those places are called Hurricane lamps. I don't know if there is the same thing. And so I realized that I was in a low resource setting. That was my experience. And then I want to develop the theme starting from my experience with three case stories. An integrated health program, the conflict, and the beginning of the HIV pandemic. So the first, we found ourselves in a situation where we had very, very limited resources. And the decision was, however, to try to make an intervention that could take care not only of the curative medicine, but with a lot of attention to the preventive and community health. So there were 3 hospitals in the district, 16,000 square kilometers, 3 hospitals, and so 3 hospitals plus the district, so a lot of people were living in the villages, very sparse. And then a comprehensive approach, a primary health care approach, so that to empower people to take care of their health first, and then to have access to preventive and curative medicine. A public-private partnership, so to try to make private hospital or missionary hospital or diocesan hospitals to work together with the public hospitals, and in particular the empowerment and education of health workers. There were a few, they had little training, but it appeared to us to be the strongest resource. Not only the trained health workers, but also the traditional healers in the community, like the traditional birth attendants that were the midwife in the villages. They had a lot of experience. They needed just to be conversant with some few emergency issues to limit mortality and morbidity. And training community health workers to have a network of people who could collaborate with the health system in order to improve the health of the population. In particular, we created a newsletter in very simple English that could be translated to the villagers that were, in many cases, were not speaking English but vernacular, but in a language and written by them, by the health workers in the various community, to communicate and to make people aware of what was taking place. This was when I saw the picture about the 50s, the wars in the 50s, that was our context. Actually, there were a lot of polio cases and a lot of backlog. Anyway, this was the newsletter that we created. There's some few stuff, very few, our vehicles, and then that was one of our words. And then the idea was to create what in local language is called kero. That means to create a situation where the people have the capacity or the ability to take care of situations. Everything was based on the passion, commotion for men. This man is Giorgio Saladini, was a very skilled surgeon, but we'll come back to him to show how compassion can have a creative impact. This is also the fact that we were trying to communicate to the population the results of the vaccination campaigns, because people are convinced by results, are convinced by the fact that in the hospital they are taken care of. So they will trust you when you go there and you ask sacrifices or you ask changes in their way of keeping water or keeping the children, isolating the measles or not, etc., etc. So this was a very important tool, simple, but very, very cheap, but capable of involving the whole population. And not only, but the health worker were writing themselves the articles. So they were feeling proud. They were feeling main characters of the adventure we were doing together. Okay, this in the intervention we did, there is a specific disease. I think you have seen guinea worm disease those days. This is a particular parasitic disease. That is the water people were drinking, and that is the situation on the water sources were shared with animals, etc. And to summarize, it was important to understand the lives of the people. There are difficulties in relating with the health workers, and the necessity to involve volunteers in the community, to involve the traditional system, for example, what is called the road query, because there is a tradition that people dig as a community each field. So all the whole community digs your field, then they go all together to the other field, and then etc. So involving these local leaders in the struggle, for instance, in preventing transmissible diseases, it was a very successful method. Although the participation of the rural peasants, families and villagers, but especially the health workers, even those in the most remote health centers. And Guinea War, that was a quite, this was the situation in 1980 when I arrived. We did a survey, and there were in the district there were in 125,000 cases of Guinea War. So we went house to house with these people, and we were able to eradicate the disease with very simple intervention. The training of the villagers, case containing reporting, because it's important to know how things go on, vector control with a bait, that is disinfectant of water, water supply, cash reward, because at a certain point the cases were so few that it was necessary to report them and to give a bit of the... And then the disease disappeared, so Uganda is free of the disease. And this happened in a period we shall see later, where there was not only dire poverty everywhere, but there was a conflict. So there was a very severe confrontation between a rebel group and the government, but the people were involved. So whatever side they were involved in the struggle against a common enemy that was the disease, the Dracunculus medidensis. But so we were so proud to have eradicated the disease in a low resource setting, mainly through the involvement of people and with very simple technological tools. The second case is the fact that by then northern Uganda, by the definition of the UN Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Jan Egeland, northern Uganda between 1985 up to 2006 was the biggest neglected humanitarian emergency in the world. We are repeating this regularly. Now there are others. At present there are about 40 to be conservative conflicts in the world. And this conflict was characterized by a major displacement of people in protected in camps. You see the line in the camp. And one characteristic was that people were at night, even if they were in the camps, they were trying to find protection inside the hospitals. So at night, the hospital was full of thousands of people, I think up to 15,000, 20. The same was happening in Kigum or in other hospitals. So about 10 to 15,000 people were taking refuge in the hospital. So the hospital was the only safe place in the area. This is the kind of life, and there on the right side you can see the people, especially children and women, sleeping under the verandas of the ward of the hospital. These were the camps from aerial view. There were about 1,500,000 displaced in those days in camps like that. You can imagine in this situation the ability to prevent parasitic disease and get rid of it. The other aspect that was very important, and that's why people, especially women and children, were taking refuge in the hospitals, was that rebels were kidnapping children to transform them in child soldiers. And so then even from 8 years to 15, 16 years, children were abducted, and during the conflict about 60,000 the children were abducted and taken to the bush, transformed in soldiers, and some of them were coming back, a good number, and we did a lot of work to rehabilitate them. Sorry for that. And there was a moment when the conflict reached the highest level that our strategy, and then this we work together very closely. Our strategy was to protect the hospital as the last barrier to the total collapse of the civil society, the civil living of people, because there was no other structure that could resist the violence, the intensity of the conflict, and the killing, etc. And it was interesting that this strategy became a kind of last barrier. And then we worked together, all the hospitals in all the north, and about 2 million people were depending on these services, and the hospital remained the last barrier. And then we worked a lot to keep them working and be able to continue to serve the people and even host them inside a lot. We were helped a lot also by Canadian government and United States government, etc. And creativity. This is a peculiar picture. This is Kalongo Hospital in northern Uganda, where I worked a bit for 1 year. And the certain point, people were taking refuge in the hospital. One night I was there. There were 14,000 people inside the hospital. And with all the problems you can have, people under the sky, the danger of epidemics, hygiene, etc., because in the morning the hospital had to come back to be an hospital. And so the people were coming in and out. So we wrote a proposal. I remember I wrote a proposal because I live in a village where we have a castle that was built in 1100 and was built to protect the people when there were in the invasion of the population from Hungary. They were coming, they invaded Italy, northern Italy, so they built a number of castles, practically, make walls to protect the people. So even we had to have such a creative mentality to see how was the situation. And then you see there in yellow, we decided to ask the government of the USAID to fund a wall to build a kind of protection for people, as we were doing in the Middle Ages in Europe, to protect for the invasion. And then they financed it. We built also some shelters for the people. Now all these shelters are schools. So after the conflict, they became school. And then this is the same Giorgio Salandini, another, in my opinion, extraordinary way of being creative in front of an unexpected. So Giorgio, during the day, was in the theater performing his surgeries, and at night we realized that there were a lot of children. So with the wife, they decided to go and tell fables to the children and make the children narrating stories. And there you see Giorgio that is showing the children the picture and telling about stories. This is something great. Then a library was built. Now, this appears not to be so much health. I don't think. It's very much health, because you can imagine the impact on the mental health of young people and persons that have to conduct such a life in and out of the hospital just to get protection, because somebody can come and pick you and take you to the bush to become a soldier. So this was, in my opinion, what Giorgio and Pupa did was an extraordinary way to prevent mental health problems. The third example is about HIV/AIDS. HIV/AIDS was a sudden, terrible epidemic which started in the early 80s, but we realized only around 85. I think this will be also in the movie tonight, we shall see. But what, in my opinion, has been important in the experience of the HIV/AIDS epidemic is that people, simple people, mothers, grandmothers, brothers, sisters, started to take care of the sick themselves in the house, in their homes, And it was, first of all, a mobilization of everybody. And by then there was no treatment, and this kind of approach that people were becoming actors of the struggle against the pandemic, taking care of the dignity of the people, and therefore then also including other interventions, maybe preventive and so forth. And the front line of the struggle all over Uganda, but also in our areas, has been the community-based responsing and supporting the traditional safety net of the extended family, caring for the sick and the orphans, and guiding the education of the young generations. This was an extraordinary experience I witnessed, and an indigenous, homegrown African approach to AIDS. Initially, there was no treatment, and then at the cost of about 23 cents per person per year, during the crucial early years of behavioral change, there was a model that could allow a reduction, not depending on mortality, of the prevalence. So many places started, and myself, I follow much more some of these groups called Meeting Point, but there are many, some in La Joie, in Gulu, etc. I wanted to give you 3 examples showing how creative care can be achieved by a proper use of the main resource we have, that is people. And then not only the health workers, but the communities and the families can become the real actors of health, because health is not only health for all, but is health by all, and is health for all. I mean, is very interesting. The second is that sometimes, even in very, very, very constrained situation, you can build up a decent health service. And number 3, that a number of situations can be solved and taken care of by the community themselves, and they are a powerful. But for me, the most difficult situation is that when I see people coming to the outpatient where I do vaccinations, and they are not aware of their diseases. You ask them, what do you have? I don't know, I take this, I take that, but aware of this. So at the end of my presentation, then you listen to Dominique. I want to thank the American Association of Medicine person for having invited us. And I'm, for my life, I'll always be grateful to my staff, with whom I worked in Uganda for many years, and taking care of people in very, very difficult situations. But today, I feel very much taking to pay tribute to the civilian population and health workers that are working in this very moment while we are here, are working to take care of people in very, very difficult situations, because there are 40 wars going on. Some of them we know very well, some others they are completely unknown and invisible. So, and I'm grateful for that.
I know, but where is it? Thank you.
Sorry, my family is...
So good evening, and thank you very much for inviting us and sharing our experience, especially in the work. I trained as a doctor, but by the time I got my medical degree, the hospital, my parents' hospital, had become a really big hospital with Ugandan doctors. And so, of course, there was need for documents, but there is even more need for funds, because we seem to be locked in a war that had no end, apparently. Both my parents died when you still couldn't see, the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. And if you need to treat people who are getting poorer and poorer, somehow the money must come from somewhere. So I threw myself in the two foundations, one in Milano and one in Montreal, that my parents had set up, and tried to develop them into a real fundraising entities that could send especially support to the hospital. I'm much more practically minded than Filippo, and I will just run through the hospital's history because that shows how much creativity is needed in in an extremely poor resource setting, and then give you an idea of the hospital today and of the challenges that a hospital like ours faces. So this is an aerial photo, a recent one of the hospital. The hospital is very large. We have 500 beds, and then we have 3 peripheral health centers. We have a very large green technical workshop because throughout the decades of wars and failed state, if you wanted something, you either had to build it, repair it, or whatever. So all the water, the energy had to come from yourself. And then there are training schools. We have about 600 students training at our schools at any time, and a lot of lodging. For decades, it was too dangerous to live outside, so the staff would say, give me one room, but give me a room within the hospital for me and my family because it's too dangerous outside. So my parents started each from his own country with an idea of going to work where there was the most need. Dad sort of met my mom here while he was doing a stage in pediatrics, and then they sort of shared their ideals. But then he went back to Italy, ended his third postgraduate specialization degree, and then went through India and Africa looking for the right place. He was looking for a place where he could develop a hospital and not leave it as a small mission hospital. And when he chose the place, he heard from my mom that she was training in France. And so he said, why don't you come for a couple of months so that she start the surgical part. My mom was a surgeon. And she said, okay, a couple of months. And so if I'm here talking to you, it means it wasn't just a couple of months. They married in the hospital, and they are both buried in the hospital. I went to school over there, and right from the start, let us say there was some sort of induction from my mom, because she was always dragging me around the hospital and sitting me on the bed while she was doing the rounds, and sitting me in the operating room when I was even too small to stand alone. They both had an idea that was very common in the 50s and 60s. It was people leaving for Africa with an idea of creating hospitals to treat people. The primary healthcare aspect came afterwards with Filippo and his generation. And what they wanted was to make sure that they could create a health institution that would really try and offer the best possible care to the greatest amount of people at the lowest possible cost. And that has remained a guiding star to the hospital to this day. And of course, to train the local people. So the phases were, initially we had Italian missionary sisters who had trained in England because it was a British protectorate. They had trained in England and had nursing and midwifery academic titles. But the local people were trained on the job. So of course the dream from the beginning was Africanization. So the first school for nursing was founded in 1973, and other courses were added, midwifery, laboratory assistant, and everything. And then another big step, while the country was really falling apart in the 70s and 80s, but the Italian cooperation was very, very strong in Uganda, and it allowed our hospital to be named as a teaching hospital for the then only one faculty of medicine in Uganda, and that allowed Ugandan doctors to start coming and doing their internship in the hospital and then going to work in all the other missionary hospitals as well. And then another very big step was the founding by the government of the Gulu Faculty of Medicine. We were at the time, 2003 was really one of the worst periods of the war, and the whole country had been in peace and developing since the early 90s. And we were like stranded in a bubble, isolated in time and space. being left further and further behind. So this Faculty of Medicine really felt like something that gave us some hope for the future. And then recently we've had an Italian government Faculty of Medicine founding a site within our hospital. So it's not only for the Faculty of Medicine, but for the whole university. So there's really a going back and coming forwards of people getting to know each other, which we think is an extremely great richness for everyone. As Filippo said, we went through decades of conflict, and we always thought it was a low-impact conflict because they hardly used any firearms. They used landmines, but mostly it was sticks, machetes, and closing people off in huts and setting them on fire. But all of a sudden in 2012, we were surprised to see a study of the conflicts that had been ongoing since the 40s. And we found ourselves there with one of the highest level of combatant victims in all these conflicts. It was a really horrifying conflict, as Filippo says. People there live of subsistence farming, so you have a group of huts and they have their fields around them. And they just had to flee and look for places of more security. And so you had these camps. Filippo talks about 1.5 million, but these were the formally recognized internally displaced. In our hospital, we had not only the night commuters coming in at night, but we had people who had actually settled there until the Ebola outbreak, so they were evacuated, but they were 3,000 and they were not officially recognized. And so they settled in these camps, and this is Amoro, which is surrounded practically our health centers. It was one of the biggest, 60,000 people, souls, living in really tight quarters, not being able to go and dig in their fields, surviving out of humanitarian assistance. World Food Programme kept 2 million people alive in all these years in northern Uganda. Unbelievable situations. These kinds of sea of small huts and people not being able to do anything, the most desperate poverty. This is a picture of the hospital. One is the hospital wards at night with people lying. It was difficult for the doctors finding a space to go to the wards if called. And the other one is a picture of the people massing in front of the gate at 6 o'clock in the morning before they opened the gates. And this is the road outside the hospital at 6 o'clock at night while they're coming in. It was like a biblical exodus, especially children and women. When I talk about children, we're talking about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. These are the ages that would be kidnapped. The kidnapping in the villages used to occur like this. A raid would come in of rebels. They would grab these children, loot, put the loot on the head of the women, and force some of the children they would kidnap to kill an elder brother, a father, a relative, so that the child knew he had done something so horrible that he would reduce the risk, they would reduce the risk of them trying to escape back to their people. And then there was the other issues. Filippo talked about the HIV pandemic. When we first got the tests in our hospital, it was 1993, 30%, 29% of pregnant women were positive. It was really, I was touched personally because my mom probably got infected while operating during the Uganda-Tanzania war. That's when she started having to operate a lot of war casualties. She started having the first opportunistic diseases in 82, 83. When the first test came out in 1985, she was positive. But then we had the other issues, and we never speak enough of malaria. And suddenly, in 2010, there was a big American program that said, let us do some indoor residual spraying. They did it massively in our area. 800,000 homes were sprayed. And within 1 year, you can see the picture of the children ward. In year 2009, 2010, children ward the following year. There is an amazing fall that feels, at the time it felt like, when Fleming discovered antibiotic penicillin, it must have been something like that. After a few years, they said, okay, it really works well. We give it back to the government. They can continue and we move elsewhere. And as usually happens, the government didn't have the funds. So as it had crashed, it exploded literally. So at a certain point, you had not only the kids being affected, but the women, the adults. Many times there's huge consequences that are invisible to Western countries that support Africa, because the good results were immediately and very highly publicized. But what happens afterwards wasn't. Then we also had an Ebola viral hemorrhagic fever that exploded in our area in 2000. At the time, the medical director of the hospital was a Ugandan doctor named Matthew Lukuya. He had been among the very first group of doctors, newly graduated doctors coming in 1983 to do their one-year internship and had remained. He was a pediatrician. He was finishing his master in public health at the capital when he was called, because we had 3 sudden deaths of nursing students. Now, sudden deaths with no diagnosis is frequent when you don't have the means to do a diagnosis of everything. But that if this happens to very well people, young, healthy people, who die of a very short febrile illness that can look like cerebral malaria, meningitis, that was really strange. So he came back. He was an extraordinary person, both as a human being and as a doctor. He studied the charts and then decided it was a viral hemorrhagic fever and started doing everything that he could, which meant telling the government that there was this thing, closing down the hospital, installing one of the wards as an Ebola ward, and convincing his colleagues, his staff, to work with him. And he convinced about 100 of the Ugandan staff to volunteer to risk their lives day after day in the ward, because he used to say, we cannot do like they do elsewhere, to close these people who are ill. At the time, there was no vaccine, there were no treatments. So what would happen, they would just close, isolate the patients, and send the relatives to care for them. And he was saying, how can the relatives know how to protect each other? They can't. It is our duty to do it because we know how to protect ourselves better. And also because you never know if there's some support treatment that can help increase the survival rate. And lastly, if I had this disease and I was dying, I would not want to be left alone. I would want someone with me. So 100 of the staff accepted to work with him, and they started dying. So he went to the government hospital in town where the WHO was managing another ward, and WHO and MSF, and he asked the guy who was responsible, a WHO doctor, saying, what are we doing wrong because we're having people die? And the doctor said, your problem is that you're a compassionate hospital. You don't leave the patients alone. You try and give them support treatment. You do intravenous fluids. You try and take x-rays, and that's your problem. And we lost 13 staff, last of which Dr. Matthew died. And he was the last to die. He prayed, he was heard praying, if I die, let me be the last one. And at that point, my mum had died a few years before, and he died, and he was the future. My parents, you know, when you think you always dream of an ideal son. Well, my parents had him. He was really ideal. And when he died, everybody was afraid to come into the hospital. The bank in Gulu did not accept checks from the hospital because they were afraid. It was the Ebola hospital. And we really thought everything would finish there and then. But little by little, people took courage. Little by little, the patients started coming back. We realized that we couldn't focus on one person, however extraordinary. We needed to focus on a team, and that has helped us go back. I'll skip this because I'm being a little bit late. This is some of the numbers of the hospital. We have 700 permanent Ugandan staff, including the directors. There are only 3 expatriate white people there, specifically requested by the directors because those figures cannot be found in Uganda or would be too expensive to pay. So we have the engineer who is head of the technical department, the financial manager, and we have one last Comboni missionary remaining, Brother Carlo, who is a radiology technician. We have 600 students. 80% of our patients are women and children who are the most at risk. These are some pictures of the outpatient department. Outpatient, we have 6 operating rooms plus 1 obstetric room. We have the only ICU in northern Uganda, 8 beds, sometimes squashed to 10. This is the children ward. The ground floor is 145 beds for 0 to 12. Inside the children ward, we have a neonatology unit since last year. It's also, this is one of the very, very few in northern Uganda. Children ward. Some pictures of Uganda. Very bad traffic, very bad conditions, the roads, the vehicles. So a lot of crashes, and they all come at our hospital. This is the courtyard. We don't give food to the patients. Many hospitals in Africa can't. It would be a huge, if you have very, very small budget, food would take a lot of it out. And the mandate of the hospital has always been to try and stretch resources as much as possible to try and make a difference to as many people as possible. So usually an average admission is 4, 5, 7 days, and they bring food. There's always someone who comes from the village with the sick person who is admitted and stays with the patient and prepares his food and helps care for him. This is the annual stakeholder meeting for the local population. So what does this cost? We cost about 8 to 9 million Canadian dollars a year, which is a huge sum in Africa, but it's very small if you consider in Europe. And most of the income comes from outside. 60 to 70% of our income must come from outside, because if the population is too poor, but you do want them to have some health service, then the money needs to come from somewhere. And so our job is to try and make people in the West understand how important it is to share something of what they have with populations who have so much need and who are so worthy of our help. Many people tell me, okay, I will give you an equipment, I'll pay for the equipment, and they think that that's all that is needed. But that's just a tiny little bit. The rest is what the donor doesn't think he needs to give. But it's much bigger, and it's what the hospital needs to put year after year if you want the equipment to work. And people tell me, but we really help Africa so much. Yes, that's the visible part. The visible part is the aid that goes to Africa, and it's let us say, the immigrants who are here and send money back. But what is invisible is what is stolen from Africa, and we're sitting on it and allowing it day after day. And it's not apparent, we don't see it. If we're living 7, 8, 9 times beyond what our own country should be able to give us here, it means that we're getting it from elsewhere. So I advise you, I would ask you to have a look at a website as a study called Honest Accounts. It's a group, a network of organizations trying to trace the licit and illicit flows that are taken out of Africa. And people say, well, but Africa is so corrupt. Yes, there are a few people, relatively few, who are in technical places that can be corrupted, but who is the corrupter? Who are those who are doing over there what they would never dare do here? Something needs to change here as well. Some picture, Uganda is really beautiful. It's 1,000 meters over the sea level. The Nile crosses it from southeast to northwest. And last, This is Angioletta Appio Agnai. She is one of the head nurses. We were at school together. I did my primary schools there. And she was one of the very first nurses to graduate from the nursing school. And she is the kind of people I think of when people say, you know, there are heroes in Africa, and usually you think of white heroes. But for every white hero, you have many, many, many black heroes. Angioletta, during the period from 1986 to 89, when we had rebels coming in even several times a week, they came at night, they looked for money, they looked for drugs, and if they didn't find enough, they would try and kidnap the nurses. So the next day, my dad, other people would try and get a contact with the rebels and try and discuss a ransom and get the nurse back. So what Angioletta would do, and all her colleagues, when they were having night shift, they would go and work in civilian clothing, so that if a raid came, they would hide among the patient's relatives who were sleeping under the beds and try and avoid being kidnapped. Years and years of doing this on a miserable salary. I remember years when the children ward, 100 beds, peak malaria season, March, 300 kids, 400 kids, 600 kids. You'd walk inside in the morning, you had a pile of charts like this, and you'd say, what is this? And these are the admissions today, a pile of charts like this. 4 nurses in the morning, 4 nurses in the afternoon, 3 at night, for a miserable pay. My parents were always, called heroes, but my parents, first of all, they had white skin. In our area, it was always a protection. I mean, a rebel would have hesitated to shoot at my parents, would never have hesitated to shoot at one of our Ugandan staff. And my parents always had the return trip back home. If they'd have enough, they would just get away. And you think about this when we're raising borders everywhere against these people who are doing exactly what we've done, because we're all originating from the third out of Africa 20,000 years ago. We all migrated. We were all black at the beginning. So it's amazing to see that we're trying to avoid allowing them to do what we did before them. And it requires so much to open your eyes, open your hearts, and give some help. And it's really amazing how even working in really resource-poor conditions, you can really make a difference for a lot of people. Thank you.
Obviously, it's much more difficult to build into this story. I'm really not just her, and also I think the fact that they're two souls that could be even hard, willing to sacrifice for another one. We're open for questions. Any questions to our two guests? I'm sure you have a lot of ears. Right up, right?
I guess I just really want to say thank you. I'm really so touched by not only the compassion and the work, the huge amount of work, but by the courage of, especially the people there. And also of whatever led your hearts to be there and help build this. But and many of you saw this thing, I feel and bless you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll relay it to the Ugandan staff.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to ask if there are certain things that you think can be gleaned from this context to to apply in terms of insight to the North American context? What perspective might there be to bring to bear on a different environment, different challenges, for giving some illumination to North American healthcare?
I try to answer, though I don't know very well in depth the situation here, but for sure, I think the value of health workers, I think as she said, I don't think there is much difference from the point of view of this compassion and dedication that you presented the whole day, even yesterday. So I think the first point is that the real resource are the people in health. The second thing is that to be able to do, to respect the value of things, also to be able to work with what you have, and then also to be able to keep resources for those more in need. Sometimes there is a lot of waste that I think is the second point. The third point, peace. I think peace is important. I mean, so many constraints we had were mainly due to wars, and even a country so beautiful that could have everything, brilliant people, like I think a place where you have people like Matthew Luquia or others I knew and we knew. You cannot explain, but the fact that there are conflicts, divisions, hatred, and I think this is one of the major things, also in our small environment. So I would say three things: the value of health workers, to be able to use properly resources, and number three, to work for peace in our environment. And I think today you gave so many suggestions that I think we have to treasure, like be able to listen to each other, to explain things, to make people to understand. And I think, for instance, for me, I work very much in public health, but people in the community were believing us working in public health because in the hospital they were fine treatment and they were cared for and quite often cured because we were infectious diseases, operated. Now, to get the confidence of people is an alliance of so many health workers. So there are a number of lessons that I think are good for you. And on the other hand, we are very grateful to the people on North America and Canada for that, even to, especially to Lachor Hospital, but also to many other places in the world. And that is very, very important.
I would have a question.
I would have a question because look at all this work, all these great things that have been done in such an adversity. And I kept asking myself, how can you not get discouraged? How can you keep faith? How can you keep hope? I'd like to understand your secret. I'd like to understand, is there anything or someone you look at or someone who inspires you? I'd like to understand better how we can go through such difficulties and face them and still believe that there's what is ahead is better.
I would like to answer this question with the movie of this evening, because there you will get the answer. In my opinion, I love this movie, though movies are difficult on people, especially your father and your mother. Maybe you hated it, but for me, I love very much the movie because there is exactly the answer to your question. I don't want to be a spoiler.
Okay.
Can I go? There's a difference between having us to talk about this autumn in 20 minutes and putting it all together so it seems really like an explosion. If you live there, it's different. If you live there, especially for my parents, it didn't all explode in a go. I mean, in the 60s, they used to say that we were really lucky in Uganda because while all the other countries surrounding Uganda were really exploding, we were really quiet in the 60s. It was a really beautiful country and at peace. It started falling apart socially and economically. And at that point, many people left because they said, if you're a doctor and you don't have the water, you don't have the electricity, you don't have the drugs, what do you do? But at that point, my parents had been there for 10 years, so it sort of becomes natural to try and put your own generators, dig your own wells, train the people to repair and build all the buildings. And then suddenly something seems to go really wrong, like the Uganda-Tanzania war. That was the very first period of insecurity we had when Idi Amin was overthrown. That was a very bad time. But you sort of think, okay, you know, they're going to conquer the country, and then we'll go back to what it was before. And it doesn't. It improves, but it doesn't go back to the place. So you sort of adapt to life. And by the time things are getting really bad, you've got hundreds of Ugandans who are there depending on you, because if you run, what are they going to do? Because they don't get the funding anymore, they don't get the support, and they're not protected by your presence. So going away becomes, you know, you've gotten used to it little by little, and you have all these people there that when you get to know, I mean, how can you? How dare you leave? And I think it's not so much of a question of having courage to do it, but you would need a great lot of courage to go away at that point, you know, sort of chicken out at the idea of just running.
Thank you. Can we take one or two more questions? Cristiano?
It is.
Sorry, maybe I hope it's not too personal and too off topic, but there's often talk in less stressful situation like in the Western medicine about life and work balance, right? And you know how sometimes we feel sort of torn between, or many of the colleagues is that you can think divided torn between, you know, the needs that we want to serve in the hospital or we are at work, and the needs of our families, our friends, and other people that might be expected to be home at a decent time and stuff like that. And you feel when have children that did that, like the way you chose for your children in a certain sense, you know, to share with them this very radical choice for life. And Dominica, I guess, too, also were born in a context that didn't much of a choice about, you know, and you seem to be a very happy person about that, right? So I guess the question is, how does the number of categories that our job requires of us, you know, the right kind of indication that our jobs require of us doesn't necessarily alienate us, you know, from our families or our other, you know, personal realities. I don't know if it makes sense to you.
Because these people don't see me. First of all, we felt at home. My family was at home. So, as I think Piero and Lucille were at home.
The best
These
child.
people, I mean, though she's called a team, that means born far from home, but that is a name given by the people there. But I think when Dominique goes there, you are at home. People recognize you as part of the landscape of the place. You are one of them. First of all, we felt at home, number one. So we didn't feel so much, even if then we went, after 29 years, we went away for various reasons. But at home. Second, we were never alone. I think for us, the fact to be there as families was very important. I think the love story of Piero and Lucille is very, very fascinating. You get the book or you see the movie, you see that it's a love story. Even for us, it was a love story amongst our families, my family, and the people there. I have some people, some friends there, like the nurse you have shown up, that they're part of our life. So we don't feel very much something. Then, of course, well, I don't want to spoil the movie, but the fact of being together and having an idea and is very, very important. It can make the difference And then, as we say, we can begin a revolution in a small group. We can really change the situation in a place, as was told this morning. I felt, actually, as she said, privileged to be there, being there and staying with these people. So far, I still have some small animals, because when I went away, they gave me
A goat.
They gave me a goat. Then I could not travel with a goat. So I say I can live in custody of a friend. And then after a couple of years, they sent me a letter, and they said, "Do you know that was a she goat? And then you have a you have a number of goats waiting for you."
No, if I can add something, it's true. It is a privilege. I mean, when you go there and you have the privilege of working with people who have been there for, the 3 directors now, Dr. CP came when he was a young graduate doctor in 1985. The other directors came in 89 and 92. So these are people who, like me, know every stone of the hospital, and all the stones were there before the same stones. And you've got these people who are there and have been working there since, and you see the way they work together, always trying to, work in balance. Decisions take really long times. Any decision, even if it's a small one, takes a huge time because they are so overwhelmed. You must think that for every doctor we have there, especially the directors, they are directing things that here you would have various teams doing, and they're alone and they're doing it all. So it takes a long time to get an answer for anything, and it gets a long time because they will talk with it between themselves. They really share everything. My husband is a surgeon, university professor surgeon in Policlinico Milan. And he sometimes come home telling me about the way, the bosses are behaving and things like that. And you sort of say how horrible, God, how lucky I am to work with those people. If we never experience horrible things. So it's really true. It is a huge privilege. And what you see here that was packed, concentrated on all the horrible things that happened to Uganda shouldn't take away from the fact that you're working with really, like here, you have, the really top ones who are really, really good, and then you have the big, massive people who are doing their job well, then you have those who would burn if you could, but you can't. That's in manage. But you have a whole lot of people who are doing really, really good, and are really good people, so.
Thank you. Some more questions? Or maybe for tonight? Or okay. There's one here in the back.
Hey, my question is for Dominique. What can we do to help? Because we hear a lot of stuff with the VCA. I hear that stuff since a long time. And I'm always wondering, when we get out of that room, from that door, what's going to change? What can we do to help to change? And I would like you to explain what can we do in Montreal to help you, because we see a lot of help in Ireland, and then now it's time to see what can we do.
That's what good.
Okay, if we have managed to open a door on the world that seems so far away, it is not far away. It is really close. And we're on a planet that is getting slower and smaller. And the consequences we can see every day, how things very far away can touch us. We've seen it with the COVID pandemic. We don't want to see these things, but they are there. Let's not just try and close our eyes to the bad things. There's a huge lot of good things that are going on. Let's open the doors. Try and learn more about these faraway places, and try and do a little bit. Many people say, oh, but if you need to, improve things, you need to do so much. No, the world is made of drops. The sea is made of drops. And we really change things and we change patients' lives thanks to a little bit of support. It's not important to give a huge support once and then stop. We don't believe that. We need a little bit of support always, all the time. Choose an organization on the other side of the world where things are really difficult. And things are getting more and more difficult because of climate change that they had no hand in producing. We did it ourselves. And they're bearing the consequence. When I was a kid, seasons were amazingly regular. I mean, you had 2 long seasons, one rainy and one dry season, and then a short rainy season and a short dry one. And they came like a Swiss chronometer. Now, one year they delay a few months, another year they're starting much earlier. The people live on subsistence farming. It means you dig with your hands. And if the rains don't come, you've dug. There's famine the next year. And it's really hard. So choose a school, choose an organization that does schools, that does health, that does whatever, and support it a little bit every month or every year, but regularly. And learn and talk about Africa. It's not so far, it's very, very close. And we have a huge hand in the troubles they have, a huge hand in the troubles they have.
My question would be on that same note. You have personal experience with the government, with the organizations. Is there one or a number on them that you would recommend? Because there is the fear of corruption. There is the fear of, I'm sending my money to the wrong people. I'm sending my hope to the wrong group. And we own this information all over the place, but first-hand information from people who are on the ground doing the work, experiencing the good with the bad, is extremely helpful in confidence.
First of all, and also to answer to both, I think here we are in Montreal. From this place came Lucille Tisdale. So first of all, be proud for that. Second, I think that we try to describe some experiences that are really having an impact, a huge impact. And I think on one hand can be supported in many ways, but also to especially being here in Montreal for your government or for your wherever you are coming from, I think their money is properly used and documented. Actually, in our experiences, we receive a lot of funds from U.S. government and from Canadian government, I think, and also for common people. And we think we have worked properly. So the organization we work with, very, very useful. So I think that here you can really help, and really Dominique, because the sustainability of health system depends on the third payer, because there are 3 payers for health: the patient, the institution, and there is a need of a third one. If there is no government, if there is no whatever, there is need to have a third payer. Otherwise, people will die and suffer. So I think this is an important thing for our governments. We have always to insist. Peace depends also on decent conditions of peoples. And if they will not move if they are in decent conditions. And I think the possibility to help Dominique or another organization, to do a good work and also to experience it. And what she's doing is really well documented. And also this experience gives a lot of courage to health workers to say we can make the difference. And I think Lucille made the difference. For me, is one of the inspiring figures of my life was to see Pierre and Lucille, because I was there in 1981, in April 1981, and still remember I was struck by dedication and so on. Then life became very easy because I had somebody to look at.
Let's be practical. Do they have a website? Do they publish account? Do they have audited accounts, even in Uganda? When I started this job 30 years ago, the hospital was already being supported by the Italian government, especially, not the Canadian government. It was a real huge support, but everybody had left. The Canadians and all the others had left because Idi Amin was considered, unhelpable. But then the people would suffer. So, and so the hospital was already being supported by big organizations who would do very specific projects. I'm funding this disease. I want you to account to go with these salaries. These are very complicated. So what was needed for the foundation was to get money, free money that could be given as budget support. And 30 years ago, I was told, no, you're doing it all wrong. You shouldn't do that. You should do projects. And for me, project was a bad word. The hospital needed funds that they could put in between the very specific projects so that they could keep going on, because the hospital was already focusing on the local priorities. And having a foundation that could give them budget support was a sort of a shield in the back, because we've seen the fashions of development. For example, in the 2000s, with the Millennium Development Goals, there were vertical projects, because who gave money, tons of money, wanted to be really sure that his money was going to be used well. So a sort of an impermeable bubble, hugely financed. AIDS, for example, you could get tons of money for AIDS. They would come to you and say, we'll give you all the money for AIDS and for the antiretrovirals and everything, but we need to be sure that the project was going to be managed well. So you're going to give us some 20 staff. We're going to manage them as we see fit, and pay them as we see fit. They'll only work on our project. So you look at them and you say, but in 6 months, I'll have a small section of the hospital staff working less and paid more, and the bigger portion paid less to work more. You'll destroy the hospital. And this is what many structures did. If you're small and you don't have other support, and somebody's offering you funds to do just one thing, and you're telling them, but I've got more kids dying of malaria than patients dying of HIV. They would say, no, malaria is not my problem. I'm going to fund this. So you say, okay, it's salaries for next year, let's just do it. What the budget support going to the hospital allowed the hospital to do was to negotiate and say, no, we don't depend on you to do this. We don't want to destroy the hospital, because your way of doing it is going to destroy the hospital. Let us agree on results. We'll see if we can deliver, but all our staff are going to continue working on everything. And within 2 years, they were saying that ours was the right way of doing it, starting to say dialogue projects. Of course, we send down a huge amount of money in budget support. We get it from events, we get it from people who are giving us, $50, $10 a year. It's not as if the director is going to, buy himself a car the next year. We have the agreement, 5-year, 10-year agreements that you give money, but the hospital needs to prove that it's following its mission, i.e. caring for the poor. 80% of its patients seem to be women and children. The hospital needs to have every year audited financial statements by a prime company, an international company. It needs to show that it's following the strategic plan with strategic plan steering committees. It needs to have technical audits, clinical audits. In exchange for this, you give the money. And we don't have an added audit of our own to make sure that our money is used well. This is one of the disasters of development, where you have multiple partners all financing the same thing, all having their own accountability systems, and there was a time when in Tanzania, an average doctor of the government would spend a third of his year accounting to donors, because the Swedes would come in with accounting rules of their own. The British would come in with accounting rules of their own, and the doctor would just spend time and time and time. What a waste of the doctor's time and of the money, because the hospital is the one who needs to have systems to control itself. So instead of putting money to control yourself, you put money so that it can control itself. And this needs to come out in the documents. So if an organization has websites and publishes honestly its accounts, it's essential. How long have they been there? Especially in case of emergencies, never give money to someone who is just going there for the first time. Local context is extremely complex. You cannot do anything. You will just do harm if you go there with lots of money and you don't know anything. You'll just be wasting money or even corrupting. We had that during the war years. Because organizations come in, when he talks about Yannick, the UN person who came and said, okay, it's a disaster. The next year there was a switch. Okay, Northern Uganda, emergency. 120 international organizations registered in Gulu town within 1 year. 120 organizations who've never been there before. You come because you want money from calls for the emergency. You come and the police immediately realize they have a way of getting money. You go and ask for permission for something and they say, and they keep you waiting. Now, if you need to show you've done work, you cannot afford to have people and cars, vehicles, stopped for months waiting for the police to give you whatever you need. You're going to pay them. And you're going to pay them. And there was a huge amount of corruption. They tried it with us the last time. We had a permission for a new vehicle with less seats than it had. They kept us 6 months. We kept the vehicle stopped 6 months. They never tried it again. But if you have this kind of funding that you need to show that you're doing the activities, you're going to corrupt because you need to show you've done it. Because next year you get less money. So if you have someone there who's been there for a long time, if they have audited accounts, if they're transparent and they show what they do, you get an idea of how much money is going in and how much is it doing on the ground? How much is it doing on the ground? Do they have mostly white people paid? Very few low-level Ugandans paid? That's not good. Things like that. Look out.
On that note, may I show this? The book about Lucille P. Dell.
Yeah, it's fine.
Awake from the world. Yeah, so with the P souls that the got for $30 Canadian or US.
Yeah, they say.
There's about 12 of them. No.
I like it. The book is beautiful.
I think we'll end it there. Thank you very, very much.